Now you've got a bunch of billions that are laying around in paper, don't you? You've got to do something with it. You have to have your assets out earning money. You don't want them laying around earning nothing. So what do you want to do? Well, they decided, let's put it into factories. But now if you start putting hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars investing in American industry, what would happen? Why, prices would rise. The depression would be over. And you couldn't buy as many factories that way, could you? How can you keep the prices down while you buy? Oh, excuse me, I'm a little backward up today, huh? The NRA. The president gets on the radio. My dear friends, people are hungry. Baby is just starving. Millions are out of work. More tears. He says now the reason is that we have lost confidence. See? And what we need to do is prime the pump. We must get the economy going again. How do we prime the pump? Watch this. The reason we have a depression is that prices are too low. Remember I said about a false assumption? You have a depression because production is too low. Now prices, if prices were lower, production would be up. But he said prices are too low. We therefore are going to double prices to prime the pump. All businessmen must meet together with their competitors and establish prices double the present market price or go to jail. You must collude in monopoly or go to jail for the good of the nation. I like that. Now ask yourself a little question. That's num-num, see? We kind of use our little head here and say, if prices double and people don't have any money, do they buy more or less? If they buy less, do more or less people work? Are more or less plants open or closed? Are plants cheaper to buy? There was only one way they could invest their money in American industry and keep the prices down. By passing the Non-Recovery Act. To prove this little thing, check every economic indicator of the United States government for May 1938, the second lowest month of history after Roosevelt had been in office 5 years, lower than the month he took office 5 years earlier. Every single economic indicator. And what was he selling the American people? I got you out of depression. He said, boy, it's wonderful you did, but I wish I had a job. Once they had bought up heavy enough and invested their money, now you need to get the United States into debt. It's called war. War got us into very heavy debt, and who owns the debt? Why, the same banking group. Now, with $1 trillion worth of federal debt being held by the bank group, the international bankers, the American taxpayers can be soaked $60 million in interest payments, 60,000 million in interest payments every year. And paid to a group who put up nothing. Remember, they didn't put up a single thing. They created the debt by an ink entry. This thing was even better than the gold swindle. Because you create the debt with fictitious money which you print, which you don't back with anything. Up in Minnesota a couple months ago, last month, there was a trial of a counterfeiter who was let go because the court found, and the jury found, that it could not be a crime for a man to counterfeit money that wasn't redeemable in anything. Because how can you counterfeit phony money? You see, if the money could be redeemed in gold, then what you were doing is stealing gold by printing the fake certificate, which could be redeemed in gold. But if the money can't be redeemed in anything, printing a fake one couldn't redeem you in anything but another piece of paper. And that could not be a crime. How do you like that? Oh, just a little funsy. We throw those in free. No extra charge. Now that we had the Non-Recovery Act, they needed a war to get our debt. We pulled up a nice $300 billion and a nice little shoot 'em up between Marxist Adolf Hitler and Marxist Joseph Stalin. Notice that the Nazi Party came out of the Spartacus movement in Germany, which the German Communist Party came out of, and that the Nazi Party members almost universally carried Communist Party cards. And Communist Party members in Germany almost universally carried Nazi Party cards. One was the socialist and the other the Menshevik and the Bolshevik wing of the Communist Party of Germany. While they played the little game, the purpose of the game, however, was very interesting. It was called Get Control of the United States. Notice the Second World War was fought. The American people were told, all of our boys died in these beachheads, died in these battles to preserve the independence and liberty and integrity of the small nations of Eastern Europe. At the end of the war, what did our government do? It gave those very same nations to the most despotic, colonialist empire the world has ever seen. And put these people in the most abject slavery that made Adolf Hitler look like a humanitarian. And without a shot being fired. Why? They had a problem in 1945. The United States did not have an enemy in the world. All of the armies of the world combined were insignificant in comparison to the military power of one nation with only 3% of the world's population and 6% of the world's land area. That one nation produced over half the world's total output, controlled 70% of the world's military forces, and had an atomic bomb. There was no way to punish the United States. You had to build an enemy. So 1946 and 47, the entire Russian army was put on the American payroll. And we paid the salary of every troop in the Russian army. We shipped to the Soviet Union plane loads of secret paper to make American money and the plates and our secret inks to print it, and redeemed over 19,000 millions of dollars worth of it for the International Monetary Fund. But this was all helping out. Now you see, you've got the Federal Reserve Act to control finances in the United States and American people. You've got to have now a World Bank to control world finances and to control and see that there are no competition at all to have control over everybody's finances and business. And Bernard Baruch, and we have the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. For the purpose of, when we have enough runaway inflation in the United States and England and France, they'll have collapse of the dollar, the pound, and the franc, and the radio is going to tell us that is the national monies, which all the international conflicts and the inability of the exchange system to operate in a modern and complex society, that it can only be solved by the simple little thing of issuing a single money for the world, a world money signed by Robert Strange McNamara. And then they can control all of it. And then comes what they've already suggested in the United Nations in Switzerland 2 years ago. They were told that a new efficient bank system, since the money is now all in control, it would be efficient, and the program is to establish a system where everybody in the world has a bank account, which will be controlled not with money, but through a debit and credit system using an account number for every single human being, which will be tattooed in the right hand of each individual. And when a member of the delegation from France stated what happens to those people who object to the tattooing of the number on the back of their hand, it was told to him that these people would liquidate themselves by that refusal, for they could neither buy nor sell. How do you like those apples, huh? Going to be a lot of fun. Well, what do we got? Refreshments? Oh. About 5 minutes?
Yeah, when you have the people, the punch will be on that side.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the back there'll be coffee and punch.
Okay.
Right in here.
Okay.
So if you could go about
Fine. Okay, we're going about 5 more minutes. Let's hold it. And the refreshments aren't ready yet. Don't run for the Johns assume. My whole point of this little discussion is to understand something. That all of these historical events are not accidental. They are planned. History doesn't happen. It is made to happen. The course that history is taking is a course that has been intendedly carried out by people who've taken the energy and the time to carry it out. And if it's going to be reversed, it's going to be done by people who will put out the effort to reverse it. It's simple as that. These people are fully committed to their program. Fully committed. The only question of the success of their program is what we do about it. If we do nothing, then the success is inevitable. Now, this group of insiders created and owned the whole communist movement from the very beginning. A small clique of monopolists have totally controlled it from the very inception. Lenin was obviously a hireling, as Khrushchev and Brezhnev and these boys. The International Communist International totally establishes all policy for all communist governments, including China, Cuba, Russia, and all of the others. There's never been any conflicts or splits. The splits are for American newspaper. You see, when China and Russia have a little argument, we now have an excuse to give tremendous aids to Russia to kill Americans in Vietnam. You wouldn't buy that aid without the little thing in your newspaper telling you about how we fight communism by supporting communists. We supported Tito to fight Stalin, remember? 19,000s of millions of dollars. We support Czechoslovakia to fight Russia. We support every communist nation to fight another communist nation, but they never fight each other. We get sold a bill of goods. We have sold so far 122,000s of millions of dollars of American taxpayer money being given outright to communist nations to fight communism. Notice that there has never been a nation fall to the communist in the world without the direct overt aid of the United States. Russia fell with the overt aid of President Wilson. And recognition of Franklin Delano Roosevelt preserved it in 1933. We'll even go further. The eastern nations of Europe all were enslaved by the direct orders of the United States of America. Germany was divided by the direct orders of the United States of America. We backed Ahmed Ben Bella, a known Moscow-trained communist in Algeria. We backed Patrice Lumumba while he killed 80 Negroes for every white in the Congo massacres. 80 Negro who had two grades of education or more, who was a danger because he may be a leader in his tribe or community, to resist the communist takeover, was exterminated by the communist goons. We backed Fidel Castro in Cuba. We backed Juan Bosch in the Dominican Republic. We backed the head of the Communist Party of Latin America, Ramiro Betancourt, in Venezuela. In 1945, the United States government State Department financed and armed a man named Ho Chi Minh in French Indochina. In 1946, in 1945, continued a war 5 months after Japan had unconditionally surrendered so Russia could get her army in the Far East and take Manchuria to turn over the arms supplies to Mao Tse-tung. We, at the end of the war, saw that the Japanese arms went to Mao Tse-tung and not to Chiang Kai-shek. Our State Department under General George Catlett Marshall went over and physically disarmed 39 divisions of Chiang Kai-shek while fighting for the liberty of 1/4 of the world's population. Our nation cut off all aid, and not only aid, we refused to allow Chiang Kai-shek to even buy ammunition for the guns he had. In the Korean War, while our boys were dying in Korea and had defeated the North Koreans and were running to the Yalu, MacArthur knew that there was no possibility of intervention by either China or Russia. He knew Russia could not intervene because they'd have to intervene across a one-track railroad and support their army on a one-directional railroad, 3,000 miles long. A single bomb would starve the army out of existence. He also knew that China couldn't intervene. China had only 870,000 men under arms. Chiang Kai-shek had 660,000 men in Formosa. The moment Mao Tse-tung put his troops in Korea, Chiang Kai-shek was going to go ashore, and he was going to run to Peking and the show would be over. So what did the United States do? We put the 7th Fleet in the Formosa Straits so that Mao Tse-tung could put his entire army into Korea. When MacArthur asked for permission to bomb the Yalu bridges to cut the supplies, they were told that they couldn't bomb the Yalu bridges because China might intervene. When he asked what 870,000 troops on his front were, they were told that Russia might intervene. He said across a one-track railroad, they'd have to be mad. With the world's largest navy on both flanks, when the head of the Chinese army was asked how he could put his whole army in a peninsula with the world's largest navy on both flanks and the world's largest air force in his front, a place of total suicide, how he could do that, his answer was, I had assurances I would not be flanked. Ask yourself a question. Who can give him assurances he won't be flanked but the enemy? His enemy, the United States. In Korea, we fought under the UN flag. We agreed in 1945 that the Soviet Union would always select the head of all military forces of the United Nations. Seeing our troops fought under the UN flag, The head of our forces was a Soviet general who took a leave of absence in May 1950 and went to North Korea to lead the North Korean armies against the United Nations command, in which he was commander of both of them at the same time. And you wonder why we can't win. Ask yourself a question. When was the peace signed in Korea? When does the special president war power cease? Only when the peace is signed. The special dictatorial power is given to a president always in time of war. But when does the peace treaty signed in Korea? It can't be signed. We don't have an enemy to sign it with. We never declared a war. So the president's war powers never cease. They go on forever. The same as in Vietnam. There can never be a peace in Vietnam by law. For we can never sign a peace treaty because we never declared a war. Isn't that brilliant? You name a single nation. We backed Ahmad Sukarno in Indonesia and financed him. Ahmad Sukarno was not only a communist since his youth, but was a Japanese puppet governor at war with the United States of America. And we backed him in 1945 and brought him to power. There has never been a communist who ever come to power anywhere in the world without the direct, overt, intentional, and knowledgeable aid of the government of the United States of America. And until you understand that fact, you simply do not understand the whole folly that we're looking at. It isn't a matter that Russia is defeating us. Russia is a puppet and totally controlled and has been from New York from the very beginning. There is nothing and never has been anything in any communist military manual about warfare between nations. Read their manuals. It's all internal subversion, revolution, and riot. They never intend, and they have never taken a single nation from outside military action. Not one single Russian division has ever marched to conquer a single people anywhere in the world. They have all been sold out by their own nationals. It was Czechoslovakians who enslaved Czechoslovakia, Hungarians who enslaved Hungary, Romanians who enslaved Romania, Chinese who enslaved China, Koreans who enslaved Korea. All of these were internal. And when do we learn? Our newspapers keep talking about external war, the atomic bomb. That atomic bomb is dropped on you every day. It is a keep your eyes off the real A-bomb. It's marching in your streets. It is internal subversion. It is treason, not aggression. And always has been. You know, all of us understand a thing called a mafia. We believe it exists, don't we? The underworld gang that has a union in criminal underworld activities. There is a worldwide upper world mafia. And it is no different than the other mafia, other than it has enough money to be able to buy respect. But it is far more powerful and deadly. Why is it deadly? The underworld mafia only robs you. It doesn't enslave you. This mafia enslaves you and must destroy your body, soul, and spirit. It is the first time mankind has ever faced total war. Not war just to take your land, take your property, but total war to destroy you yourself as an individual and to make you nothing but a robot, totally controlled, mentally indoctrinated, and subservient in all respects to the will of the state. It is far more terrifying than anything man has ever met in history. It is to destroy the person themselves. And you are in the path of the conqueror. Let's take our break. Thank you. In the 1936, I talked about Mexico. Let's take a look at the French finding oil in the Sahara Desert, building a pipeline across Algeria to Iran, where we see Ahmed Ben Bella, trained in Moscow, come to start his FLN, which tortured to death by the most inhuman methods 20 Muslims every day for 8 years, and make it appear to be a revolution, which of course it was not a Muslim revolution. The vast majority of the Muslims, time and time again, voted to stay with France. But that wasn't the intention. That pipeline had to be cut and put it not in the hands of the French government to break the monopoly. Or let's take a look when the oil is found in Venezuela. Now, the head of the Latin American Communist Party, his name Ramon Betancourt, joined the party in 1928. In 1934, he wrote the Red Book, the Manifesto, the takeover of Latin America. Ramon Betancourt organized the Venezuelan, Costa Rican, and Nicaraguan Communist parties. He became El Presidente of Venezuela by military coup. He spends his weekends regularly at David Rockefeller's ranch at Maracaibo. And as David Rockefeller says about Ronald Betancourt, quote, I consider him one of my closest and dearest lifelong friends, end quote. It's interesting that Ronald Betancourt, the head communist of Latin America, seizes power in Venezuela. He doesn't nationalize a single oil well at Maracaibo, all of which are owned by Standard Oil and their subsidiaries. Now, if you will take a look at another little map, if you want to know what that is, that's Europe, and that's Africa. That's United States and South America. The major production areas in the world, southwestern United States, Venezuela, the Middle East. Let's look at the oil routes today. Suez Canal is out, because the major markets are Western Europe and Eastern United States. This is your major oil markets in the world. These are your sea lanes of oil. Notice where 5 of the 6 routes cross? At a place called Cuba. The independent oil companies have built their major refineries at Havana, the best place in the world to have a refinery. But Fidel Castro came along, took care of that little show, didn't he? Watch the new one, Alaska. A couple of years ago, oil was discovered in Alaska, probably the greatest oil reserves in the world, the greatest discovery of oil ever. Now, here is an interesting little thing. Well, let me digress because I may forget this. The first tax-free foundation in the world was the Rockefeller Foundation, established 2 years before there was an income tax to dodge, 1911. And Carnegie Corporation was founded the same day. They don't pay taxes. The num-nums pay it. By the way, one industry has a special tax advantage over all other industries in the United States, and that's oil extraction. It's allowed to write off 27.5% of its investment every year, even beyond 100% unlimited. Any company with any year's history of oil extraction has built up reserves to allow them always to write off enough to make sure that no taxes ever have to be paid. And only one extractive industry, not extraction industries, but one, oil extraction. How come? Isn't that interesting? And who founded the CFR? Isn't that interesting? Well, anyway, we'll get back. Now, by the way, in New York City, there's an apartment building with only 6 apartments. Each take a full floor, $100,000 each. The owner of the building is Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, who also has one of the apartments. Do you know who lived there the 4 years before he was elected to the White House? Richard Milhouse went for his training sessions. Yes, boss. Every morning. Anyway, old Fidel, he's down there working away. Now notice something about Fidel. What was the very first act of Fidel Castro? He nationalized the refineries at Havana. Now that was stupid, wasn't it? But because as a Cuban, looking out after the interests of these poor Cubans, the oil industry, their refineries were total profit to Cuba. The oil wasn't taken, it wasn't expropriated from Cuba, it was brought in from the outside and was sold outside. It was total profit to the Cuban economy. In fact, it was the one element in Cuba that made it the second wealthiest nation in Latin America. But Fidel Castro, the day he arrived in Havana, nationalizes the very industry that made Cuba a wealthy nation. The most stupid thing he could do as a Cuban, but very brilliant if he was working for somebody else. The question is, who is he working for? For Cuba? For the peasants of Cuba? Or for the boss in New York? Let's look at Alaska. Oil was discovered in Alaska. The United States government declared a federal land freeze 2 years ago. That means that nobody can buy, sell, lease any property in Alaska. They don't want anybody making any money on the deal. None of you dirty, grubby landholders. You see, it was decided that until things were settled, to protect the investors, to protect the citizens, that they would have this freeze, giving 2 years for seismographic readings to locate all the oil so that they wouldn't have to do any bidding on land that wasn't any oil on. Now, once all the seismographic readings were being made by Standard Oil mainly and her subsidiaries, they then came up with a new idea. That is, that this land should be put into a state pool and should be leased for the good of all the citizens. Now, it's also decided that in order to keep from having unfair competition and bidding, that only one bidder would be allowed on each tract of land. And the bidder would be assigned. That's the way to make sure that the best price is got for the citizens of Alaska. But notice a rival of Arthur Goldberg's son to represent the Alaskan Eskimos in their rights for national self-determination and demand that 85% of the flat oil lands be turned over to the Eskimos as their rightful inheritance as an oppressed people. Arthur Goldberg, representing these oppressed people, is going to try to seize 85% of all the oil lands for the uplifting of the downtrodden. Oh, of course, the uplifting of the downtrodden Eskimos. So you're always going to have the uplifting of somebody. It's going to be grape pickers, or it's going to be grapefruit pickers, or it's going to be anybody we can uplift to get a little riot going, to get ourselves a nice little monopoly deal, right? You got to go out and get some people to get their head beat in. Now some Eskimos are supposed to go out and get their head beat in. You see, always get the num-nums in the street. Let's now move on to another interesting subject. All the communist nations of the world are totally controlled by the Politburo. 36 men who own, control, and run everything, or at least overtly do. They are in turn obviously puppets of some higher force. The Communist Party USA is nothing but a front group for the operation. The purpose of the Communist Party USA is for American people to blame for everything that goes wrong and to attack it so that the real conspirators can operate without interference. It is a dodge operation. It's an ad hoc committee because this is only a front operation. Let's go to the World Marxist Review, October 1965. In the official communist press, you get the straight party line. You don't have to, they make it clear because they're talking to their party members and they want to make sure that they understand the program. They say, and this is October 1965, that they have created three major offensives in the United States: the peace offensive, the civil rights offensive, and the poverty offensive. But that the final drive offensive must not be in the name of race, but in the name of poverty, the proletarian, because it must be economic determinism. It must be a poor people's drive, not a racial drive. It must be a proletarian movement, or appeared to be. Therefore, we must transfer and consolidate the peace movement, the civil rights movement, into the poverty movement for the final anti-monopoly coalition that is a proletarian drive of riots and revolution in the United States for the overthrow of this country. Notice the bang-bang down in Memphis. Dr. Martin Luther King gets shot. Notice Abernathy does not talk about Negro. He does not talk about race. He talks about the economic deprived, the nation's poor, an amalgamation of the nation's poor into a movement of the poverty. Notice the Poor People's March. No longer racial march, no longer racial sit-ins or civil rights sit-ins, but ADC mother sit-ins, welfare mother sit-ins, economically deprived sit-ins. It is the poverty offensive now, because it must end up the proletarian drive. The Negro has been converted from thinking 2 years ago, where he was thinking race, to thinking of the Negro as being an economically deprived person, and who join with all economic deprived, the nation's poor, in the fight for their just share of the national product. It is no longer a racial issue. Civil rights is dead as an issue. The issue today is the poverty of the proletarian drive, the communist revolution. At that time, they called it, this is 1965, the Anti-Monopoly Coalition. Who financed, led, controlled, and educates the trainers and cadre? The monopolist. You see? It's the biggest fraud ever. Of course, the guys out in the street don't know this. Let me give you a little illustration. A couple of months ago, I just moved to South Carolina. Before I lived in Detroit, I operated some apartment buildings down in the inner city. Now, one of the buildings, which is 1 block from where the riot started, there was an Arab groceryman named Mr. Harb. He was gunned down on the street corner there by 4 youths trying to rob him, and died within a matter of minutes. But a couple of weeks before he died, I was standing on the same street corner with Mr. Harb, and we were carrying on a discussion. And I said, Mr. Harb, you see the violence and the hatred? He says, I don't understand. He says, everywhere, everywhere. I said, get out of this neighborhood. You're not going to live long. He said, I can't. I got everything in the store. I said, get out. And he said, I can't do it. I said, do you think there's anybody behind this, or is this just accident? He says, it's a communist revolution. And I was kind of egging him on. I said, what do you mean a communist revolution? You don't believe me. I mean, you're trying to tell me that. He said, look, I want to tell you something. He said, after the Second World War, when we were poor over in the Middle East, he says, I was a revolution maker. He said, what we would do, 8 of us would go into town, and our job was to get a revolution. We were paid on the number of martyrs we got, the number of dead bodies. Strictly a dead body count. Free enterprise. I said, well, how do you operate? He said, well, we go in there, about 8 of us. 2 will get in the middle of the street, starting a ruckus. Everybody comes out. They don't have television to watch the show. They all get around, and 6 of you on the outside. 1 or 2 on the side, they say a little thing, slightly inflammatory against the government, but not much to start with, very low tone. You pick it up on the outside and start a chant. You know, the Arabs are quite emotional people, and they start moving with the chant. And then the chant builds up and builds up and builds up until the point you get them marching down to the police station. I want to show them a thing or two. Marching, shouting, you know. At this time, signs magically appear.